Welcome back, colleagues and friends. I'm going to start this second panel by a piece of great news, and I don't know if there's a relation to it, but today, and the news has just hit us, women can actually drive in Saudi Arabia. The law was passed. So I think that, it's a very symbolic. Now, to draw a conclusion as we do as economists between the fact that we organize this session and the policies in Saudi Arabia is probably far-fetched, but we're happy to raise and to continue to raise the issue of women entrepreneurship and of women economic empowerment. So let me rush into the presentation of the second panel. The idea, after presenting the challenges and opportunities of the issue of women entrepreneurship around the world, and we had a very energizing, thanks to Luis, to Sundus, to Yara, and to all the other panelists, including Karen and Ayat. I thought a very energizing first panel, a very intelligent one also. We were going to bring it down to the field level in this second panel and have cross-cutting perspectives, technical perspective, but also research perspectives on the issue and on the challenges at stake. And the World Bank is about providing or trying to provide with its partners innovating and concrete solutions. So that was part of the objective of that second panel. We have kept, as mentioned, three guests, our distinguished panelists from the first panel, Sundus Buhia, Yara Yassin, and Luis Ros. You are invited to jump in at any point in time. We will have the second panel more as an informal discussion, I think, but we will first kick it off with Torsten, my colleague and good friend, CEO of UNoodle, and Jeff Barrows, who has come here from Paris to share with us the results of what we can judge a very interesting study that has been led over the last few years. I'll turn the floor to Torsten and let him present Jeff and this work, and then I'll introduce each and every one of you thereafter. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Olivier. I will take 3 minutes to give you a very, very little bit of context before you hear from who we're here to really hear from, which is Jeff right next to me. It's a joy to be here. I want to just share a quick personal story. I started this company, UNoodle, together with my co-founder, Rebecca Wong, who was a Korean refugee from the Korean War who moved with her, or fled, I guess, with her family to Argentina. Grew up in Argentina, did really well in school, and ended up getting into MIT, got 2 degrees at MIT, and then moved on to Stanford, where she was doing her PhD. And I met her in San Francisco, and I, never initially saw her as a female co-founder. I saw her as a co-founder, and I felt very fortunate that I was allowed to start a company with her. So this whole idea of male founders versus female founders of startups for me was something very odd that I have, being next to Rebecca in a lot of different meetings and fundraising and going through years of building a company together has been a very eye-opening experience. And I think for both Rebecca and myself, that's why UNoodle as a company and as really the social enterprise that it is, has always been really interested in leveling the global playing field for entrepreneurs. And that's what we do until this day, is we do programs with a variety of different partners that are intended to open up opportunities across the world in all sorts of ways and level the playing field. But part of that is to look into the data that we're creating. So the platform, and this is why Jeff is here, the platform is essentially a sourcing and selection platform. So you run all these very structured programs where entrepreneurs are selected for opportunities. This could be financial opportunities, grants, but it could also be programs of different kinds. And of course, we've been involved in Womena in that capacity, which has also been really an interesting process. But all that data that's collected about how people are evaluated is really, really interesting to look into, because it's global, it's comparative, and it's qualitative. So we're able to see both quantitative and qualitative. And I think it was Penny who said earlier something about when there is a virtual way of evaluation, some of the gender biases actually leave the room. You know, if you're evaluated in a not in-person way, we're actually able to see that you're evaluated much more based on your merits and not necessarily based on gender stereotypes. And when we look at our data, even before we started working with Jeff and his team, we saw that we have about 28% female founders on Unoodle globally, and this is out of about 180,000 entrepreneurs. So it's a huge data set. Those 28%, when we look at who then are selected for opportunities and win grants and sort of move on in the world, we also see 28% women. So we're not observing a gender bias in the virtual selection, sourcing and selection process that happens on the platform. However, when we look at top-tier venture capital firms and who they invest in, we only see about 5% female founders in the top-tier cohort of companies that are invested in. So something happens after the process where you are selected for something, could be an accelerator or a grant or an opportunity, to later growth and success. And that's what we're really interested in. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of context here. Jeff then came to us, I want to say 3 years ago. I think you were at Berkeley at the time, and said, hey, I want to study this data set. I want to look into, can we say something about what programs work, what programs don't work? Can we say something about if you give money to entrepreneurs, is there causality? Can we actually say that this money helps them move forward? And a number of other cool things. So I'm going to stop talking and let Jeff do a very quick intro to his work, and hopefully we'll get some questions.
All right, Torsten, thanks for the introduction. My name is Jeffrey Barrows. I'm an economist at the École Polytechnique in Paris, but I'm in fact not French, I'm American. I'm very happy to be here today to present this research that it's not published yet. It's hot off the presses. These are actually unpublished results, but I'm in the process of writing up the draft now, so if you're interested in the details, they'll be available very shortly. And you can check my website or give me an email, and this information will be publicly available. But you guys get a sneak preview because Torsten asked me to come. You can't hear it on the tape? How about here? Okay. So by way of introduction, it's widely acknowledged at this point that entrepreneurship is critical for lifting people out of poverty as well as for stimulating aggregate growth. And as a result, there's lots of government and NGO and private firms that implement policies that are designed to try and encourage entrepreneurship. Grant prize awards, accelerator programs, incubator programs, et cetera. The rationale for these types of programs is very straightforward. On one hand, prizes or incubator space supplies entrepreneurs with the necessary early stage funding and support that they need to grow their ideas, when other types of funding are usually hard to secure. And secondly, if you win the signal from winning an award or a prestigious place in an accelerator program might help entrepreneurs secure VC funding down the line, which in turn helps the firms grow. Okay? So these arguments imply that being part of an entrepreneurship program should correlate with firm success, but it actually doesn't say anything about the causality impact, about whether or not being part of the program actually causally impacts and helps firms succeed. The reason for that is that if the credit markets are working very well and efficiently, then those good business ideas would have found funding anyways, in which case programs are only crowding out private markets and they're not actually increasing the total stock of entrepreneurship and innovation in the economy. That means that it's an open empirical question whether or not participation in grant prize, receiving a grant prize or participation in incubators has a causal impact in helping startups succeed, and that's exactly the question we're taking up in this study. The way we're going to address it is we're going to make use of what in economics language is called a quasi-natural experiment, which owes to the competitive selection process into program participation. As everyone in this room probably is well aware, grant prize awards and incubators and accelerators are often awarded as the result of a competitive process among many potential entrepreneurs. Donor organizations collect applications from potential entrants, and they evaluate them, and they think about them, and they score them in terms of quality and potential success. And this generates a ranking for each competition, as I've depicted in this hypothetical example here, and donor organizations then make awards based on these rankings. Now, if the evaluations are any good at all, you would expect that higher ranked firms are going to end up doing better anyways in the end because they're higher quality or they're expected to do better. So just comparing program participants to non-participants is unlikely to give you the causal impact of the program. It's going to be very difficult to tease apart the pure selection effect of the judges from the causal impact of receiving the grant or being part of the incubator. However, what we're able to do in this study is make use of the threshold cutoff that's going to be a feature of almost every competition. With a limited number of prizes that are available, there's going to be some critical rank. Here it's depicted as, say, 10. If the program has said 10 prizes to award, the top 10 ranks are likely to, top 10 ranked firms are likely to participate in the program, and everyone who misses the cutoff is likely not to participate in the program. This means that if we look right around that cutoff, if we look at, in this example, firms 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, they should have roughly the same quality. There's going to be minor imperceptible differences, but it's basically going to wash out in the regressions. So if you concentrate just on the cutoff, we're going to have firms of basically the same quality. So selection is taken care of, but we're going to have a discontinuous jump in the probability that the firm participates in the program. This is going to give us basically treatment versus control firms with which to test for the causal impact, and that's how we're going to identify it. The data set comes from the administrative records of UNoodle, which is Torsten's company that has judged hundreds of competitions in many different sectors and many different countries around the world in the past several years. And for each one from the judge data, for each one of these competitions, I'm able to recreate this ranking order and the critical threshold. Okay? Now, the key challenge of the paper is to, and in startup research in general, is to assess the success of startup firms. Now, this is very difficult and it leads to sort of a dearth in research in this area because startup firms, they tend not to even be incorporated yet. They usually don't have revenue or profits. They don't show up in traditional data sets. So it's very hard to analyze which startups are doing well or even find these firms and see if they're still alive. So in order to do this RD analysis, I need to measure the success of these startups years after they participated in the competitions that were organized by Torsten's company. So it was a big data collection exercise. We have 25,000 firms in the data set overall, and we ended up collecting outcome metrics for about 8,000 firms. We have two types of outcome metrics. The first are what I call the subjective metrics, and these are metrics that we came up with on our own in consultation with UNoodle. And I call them subjective because they rely on the subjective opinion of a research assistant. Basically what we did is we hired an army of researchers in California to come into the UNoodle headquarters and look for every single firm that participated in a competition that was judged by UNoodle. And they spent 20 minutes looking for the firm, and if they could find a live website for the firm, they recorded the website, and that's our first metric, alive. It's just 0 or 1. Can we even find a working website for these firms? And this is 4 or 5 years after a competition. Conditional on finding a live website, we then asked the RAs to make a subjective evaluation of how good the website seems to indicate the firm is doing. Does it have a modern design? Is it easy to get around? Does it show evidence of recent activity? Do they have a good description of the team? All the kinds of things that people in this room probably are well aware indicate that the website is doing pretty well. Now, we didn't take it at face value, however. We think that these subjective metrics should give a sense of the signal of the quality of the firm. Luckily, for a subset of the firms, we also have what I call objective metrics. These are more economic variables that you're used to thinking about in terms of measuring firm performance. These come from the business aggregator dataset Mattermark, which we get about 35% coverage in Mattermark. And for any firm that we can find in Mattermark, we're going to have the total amount of funding that the firm received, the number of employees, the number of unique web visits, Facebook likes, all sorts of things that are going to make it easier for us to benchmark against other studies. In addition, we're able to, so the first thing I do in the study is I show that these subjective metrics line up incredibly well against the objective metrics. It was really amazing that when we first sat down and designed these things, Torsten told me that if you show me the website, I can tell you how well this firm is doing. And it was really borne out by the RAs. I'll show you the correlations at the end if we have time. If the RAs think the firm is doing well, Mattermark confirms it. And we're going to use these two metrics basically in tandem in order to analyze the impacts. Okay, so in a 7-minute presentation, we jump right to the results here. These are the point estimates and 95% confidence intervals associated to each of these 8 outcome metrics. We have the 3 subjective metrics, and then we do some projections to get at the objective metrics from Mattermark. The point estimate is a regression estimate, and then that blue bar is what we call the 95% confidence interval. And if you remember your statistics, that confidence interval should cover the true impact about 95% of the time. And what we find is that across the board, winning a competition absolutely matters on average for future firm success. The point estimates are around 50, 75% increase over a base value. Those are, in terms of the web score and the general score, they seem large, but if you think about funding or employees, we're talking about 50% more employees down the line for a firm that won the competition compared to a firm that didn't. That's a sizable economic impact. I think maybe I'll stop there and take some questions. But this is this is evidence of a causal impact from a grant prize award, accelerator, incubator, which might speak to credit market frictions. If the credit market was working perfectly, you would not expect to see these kind of impacts. We all know the credit markets don't work perfectly, but what's really nice here is that we actually have data from startups, and we can show the impacts. If we have time, I can get into some of the differences across regions and across different dimensions of heterogeneity. Okay, so with that, should I just field some questions?
Awesome, thank you, Jeff. So I have like 100 questions, but I think I can always talk to Jeff afterwards. I think we want to spend maybe 5 minutes on a couple of questions from the audience, but really, hopefully you'll be able to connect with Jeff afterwards, those of you that are really interested, because we have fantastic panelists here afterwards. So if you have a question, could you just mark and then use your microphone here. Any questions to the research of impact of these programs? If not, we're going to get to mine. Okay, Luis, I think you were first, and I think that was Karen. Excellent, Luis.
I don't want to take any more time of this, but you have analyzed accelerators and programs and all that. So this is the aggregate of it. Yeah. Do you have an insight of which one of those approaches are most effective in terms of getting the results?
Okay. It's a little bit noisy when you start breaking up the data. I can't do a whole lot in terms of heterogeneity. However, this one actually worked out pretty well. So here we have the different types of programs. I've lumped accelerator with incubator because I find it difficult to actually distinguish between the two. And across both accelerators and grants, you have basically indistinguishable point estimates. They seem to work for both accelerators and grants. If you thought that like education was super important for like educating, if you just throw money at the entrepreneur, it doesn't do anything. And actually, what we're doing here, what's really important, is to train the entrepreneur. It doesn't seem to play a much bigger role. That just winning a grant prize without any acceleration absolutely has an impact. And in the study, I do a lot of this heterogeneity across different dimensions. I do as much as I can. That's quite important in the study.
Karen?
Thank you. I think this is really interesting research. So two questions and a comment, and one was related to what Luis just asked. I think it's really important, and the research has started to do this, to unpack the different components of interventions, because they may have differential effects for men and women before you really get to the aggregate findings. And my colleague, it's a group of people at the bank, our colleagues in the Development Economics Unit and the Gender Innovation Lab, have started to do that for various kinds of interventions like business plan competition. So David McKenzie has a paper on a business plan competition that we did impact evaluation on in Nigeria, which had had good effects for men and women, slightly larger effects for women, but not statistically significant. And then we've had impact evaluations on things like different types of training programs, how the training program is delivered, whether it's in person or on the web, virtually. So I think we have to start to really go into the granularity. So that's just a comment. And the second is, the question is the outcome measures. Yeah. And I think the outcome measures are really important. So some people think that increases in, of course, in the growth of a business measured in terms of profits or sales, which is hard to get admittedly, but it's important, obviously, growth of employees. But then there's a set of people that also want to look at increases in I'm not sure what to call it, empowerment, if you will, but self-efficacy, confidence, et cetera, of women themselves is really, really important. And then the correlation of which type of intervention with each of these kinds of impacts is probably important. And the type of intervention that may really work to increase sales and profits may not be the same kind of information that helps to increase the confidence, competence, self-efficacy, whatever you call it.
Yeah, I totally agree. We came up with every outcome metric we could. If we had any other outcome metrics, we would love to use them. And I completely agree it might change. I wanted to get to one result here, which was important for this group here. When I break it out by female on the team versus female not on the team, these are the heterogeneous results. There's definitely a statistically significant impact for an all-male team. However, there's not a statistically significant impact for a team that has a female on it. Now, the point estimates are positive. That's good. They're not super different from the one on the male side, but I can't rule out zero. Now, this is very interesting, a little bit disappointing from a research perspective. I'd point out kind of two explanations, but I'd love if people had other ideas. First is just a very weak statistical argument, is that we just don't have that many women in this data set. We've got much more statistical power for the all-male team, and that's probably what I'm going to hang my hat on, is that the point estimates aren't that different. We just have big standard errors. There's nothing I can say. Now, there's a deeper argument about, which gets to sort of the multifaceted nature of interventions, is it enough to just give a grant to a female-headed team or a team with females on it? Do you need more infrastructure around and helping people all the way through the chain? That's a much more interesting argument that might be also an explanation for these things and worthy of discussion. However, with the data I have, I can't really distinguish between those two. All I can say is that statistically for the female side, it's quite noisy.
This is so fascinating. I wish sometimes I wasn't a founder CEO, but instead I was a data scientist, researcher. I could just dive into this and spend hours on it. But I know we're all here for many other reasons, so I think we actually have to move on to the next side. But Jeff and I will be working on this much more going forward for sure to answer some of these questions. So thank you guys. Back to you, Olivier.
Biuke, please.
Just one final question. Did you look at this data at a regional level or at a country base?
Yeah, we did. So we have country of origin of the entrepreneur, and it's kind of noisy, but we use some World Bank data. World Bank has this great data on the cost of starting a business and the number of procedures to start a business, and we actually found that there were very significant impacts for those countries where the cost of starting a business is high. They're not a whole lot higher than they are for the more developed countries, but we do see, even with a smaller statistical size, we have impacts across the board, which was very good to see.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I think that, the idea was here to give you a teaser of the work that Jeff has been doing and of the work that you have been cooperating on, Torsten, at UNoodle. We don't have time, of course, to get in depth, but I'm sure that you'll come back and once the final presentation and results are there, and make that presentation. Let's move now to the practitioners themselves, those who are actually leading programs and implementation, who can very freely react to some of these points that were made, but also for whom we have specific questions. Now we have 8 panelists and 30 minutes, so imagine, my role as the moderator. It's near impossible. I already failed in it, but I think that we should try as much as possible to have this as an interactive discussion. I will be asking you one question after presenting you briefly, and thereafter, if our colleagues want to take it offline or have specific questions or interject, as the lady in white, please do so. But let me get into the round of presentation, maybe starting on my left with Melissa Rowley. She is the co-founder of Resolve, and she works at the intersection of technology, media, and social impact as a writer, a digital strategist, and of course an entrepreneur. She, the Resolve, and as a co-founder, is a specialist accelerator partnering with sector-leading organizations to help startups across the world to scale. So your views also on what we've heard would be most interesting. Melissa, thank you for being here. Your neighbor is Ana Maria Cogna. She is, and I'm reading off the script here, Chief Evangelist Officer at George Washington University. I didn't know that existed, but welcome to the table and to the panel. She's also a serial entrepreneur from first based in San Francisco and now luckily in Washington, D.C. Your neighbor is Meren Rajadurai, the chairman and Secretary of State Open Forum at the U.S. State Department. Welcome. Yasmine El Bagari, the very inspiring Yasmine, is the CEO of Voyage. She is also a key partner of the WeMena program and competition and heads the community development of the WeMena competition and thereafter community. Welcome. Luis is already well known to you. My colleague Elaine Tinsley. Elaine is at the World Bank working on innovation and entrepreneurship in the trade and competitiveness global practice, and most specifically focusing on women entrepreneurship, including in the MENA region that we talked about during the first panel. On my right and your left, Marisa Lohman leads the education practice at Village Capital and was most recently a senior fellow at Learn Capital. Marisa, you have also co-founded Learn Launch, an edtech accelerator, community and co-working space in Boston. Welcome to Washington and to this panel. Bouke Chuhadar, is that good pronunciation? Good. Is the vice president of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, which is a year-round platform of programs and initiatives created by the communities that celebrate Global Entrepreneurship Week each November. And your goal is to create a global entrepreneurial ecosystem, and you help, I believe, around 170 countries. So that's a lot of countries. Well done for that. You also know Sundus and Yara from the previous panel, as well as our panelists. So maybe to get into my first question, it will be to you, Melissa. So you've worn many different hats from the communication and tech perspective to the more entrepreneurial perspective. What we are interested listening to this presentation and maybe to the first session is what are the key trends that you feel have shaped the narrative around the participation of women entrepreneurs, and as an entrepreneur, what you can tell us also on the communication of it all.
In terms of key trends, I would say that the biggest one is that that women don't have enough access to funding and to resources. And this is due to some societal and cultural things that are taking place across the globe, but it's also due to potentially some things that women are doing to themselves, such as underselling themselves or not coming to the table enough with I guess maybe asking for permission. To Karen's point, I don't know if she's here anymore. No, it looks like she left. Something that I'm interested in looking into as an entrepreneur, particularly focused on women, is the self-confidence issue that seems to come to the table quite a lot. With Resolve, we're a very new accelerator program, and we launched our pilot program in Lebanon in May. We brought a group of delegates from the UK. A lot of them were very successful CEOs and startup coaches, and we brought them with us to Beirut for a week long to do a conference with some entrepreneurs. We created a curriculum around purpose and impact. Are any of you familiar with the Lean Startup methodology or the Lean Startup book? Andre, of course. Anybody else? Okay, so we took that canvas and we integrated purpose and impact into every single step of building a business, from the concept to operations to the execution of the actual product or service. So by the time the entrepreneurs were done filling out this curriculum, having a positive social impact or having a sustainable model was just something that happened by default. They weren't necessarily a social enterprise, but they were having some benefit on society. Most of the entrepreneurs at that particular event that we organized were men. There were 16 startups that pitched. I think there were 2 women. But something that's interesting that's happening in Beirut is that there's a tech cluster called the Beirut Digital District, and there are 1,300 employees working within tech startups. The ratio from women to men is 55% women to 45% men. Now, these women are not in the C-suite roles. They're more on manager or below manager roles. But the fact that there's that many women working in technology startups, to my knowledge, that's not happening anywhere else in the world, let alone the United States or the United Kingdom. So there's no shortage, at least in Beirut, of women in that ecosystem that are a part of startups, that have that entrepreneurial mindset. What's missing, in my opinion, are leadership programs that are helping boost the confidence of women and are actually helping to disrupt some cultural, societal things that are ingrained in the community there. The other thing that we're seeing is that there seems to be a conflict sometimes when there's cross-sector partnerships, which are highly important. You need every single sector involved. You need the governments, you need nonprofits, you need the private sector as well. What happens though when you're getting groups that are partnering and they have a very diverse set of agendas is there's no single measurable goal. And therefore you come out of it and nobody really knows if they've hit their KPIs or if they've actually collectively achieved anything or not. So one of the things that I was interested in, we can talk about this afterwards for Jeffrey and Torsten, is looking at what is considered success regionally and in these different countries, because it varies from country to country. But overall, I would say just the fact that there are initiatives like WeMena and the fact that there are countless programs across the globe focused on women's empowerment and women's entrepreneurship, there's definitely no shortage. What's happening is that the cross-sector partnerships don't have a single goal, and there doesn't seem to be enough accountability or evaluation taking place. But overall, it just, from our perspective at Resolve, it seems like women are making a huge dent. We all know that when women are in charge, more kids go to school, more kids are fed, and they put money back into the communities. We all know that when more women on boards, companies are more successful, but the numbers aren't translating in the opportunities with access to funding. And the numbers are also not translating in terms of women actually coming to the table and taking that next extra step into taking a leadership role. So I don't know if that answered your question in trends, but
very much so.
Yeah.
But let me build on that to ask maybe Anna Maria, your neighbor, what does success look like? What are the next steps to be done as an entrepreneur yourself, but also now at the helm of George Washington University, working on innovation and entrepreneurship? Could you tell us? The big question here today is, how do you build a gender inclusive and a gender balanced ecosystem or work towards it?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And that was just so inspiring what you put together. And I want to build on that couple of things. So being probably at least a decade older than the entrepreneurs here at the table, I had the opportunity to be an entrepreneur for 20 years and also start giving back in the early 2000s. So being a female entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley in the mid to late 90s wasn't that easy, yes. And learning from my own lessons, after my 5th company, I started mentoring women. And basically I was at UC Berkeley, at Stanford, reaching out to the women one-on-one and having those daily conversations, which not particularly was focusing on any technical skills, but was a little bit more focused on how are you doing and how can I help you and how can I connect you. So kind of getting back to the point, it's not always the technical skills missing, sometimes just the encouragement that you can give to them and looking at a role model, someone who did it and they can actually aspire to be that. One of the things that I do a lot, I go around the world and also in the United States, giving lectures and workshops on entrepreneurship. I was last year in Morocco and in Casablanca holding a workshop on clean technology and renewable energy. I have to say I was so proud of the crowd there because half of the entrepreneurs were female and the top 3 companies were female-started companies. One thing what I learned, they were eager to learn. We were until midnight, one-on-one sessions and things like that. But the end of it, we were at the point where, okay, what's next? Who can give me the next seed or pre-seed money where I could actually execute on my business plan, take some of my research out from the lab and make it successful. So I do see the connection, what the World Bank could fill, and also see other banks coming in and supporting, this intergovernmental support. The second thing what I wanted to say, I think all of us who are in the room have expertise. You don't have to be a serial entrepreneur. If you started a business and you failed, that's expertise. So use that and teach others. I'll give you an example. I work with the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and this is the second year when I go to a state. Last year I was in Florida. This year on Friday I'm going to Texas, and I'm teaching undergraduate how to innovate and how to be entrepreneurs. It's really giving back to people, getting to your point, who does not have the support. They are in community colleges barely. Some of them just coming in and really giving them the support to have the basic foundations to start doing what they love doing. So I kind of went to another side and not really answering your questions, but I do wanted to say that it's important to enable people like you to make a difference, because you can. And I think that's my point here. If you thinking about doing something, I have a couple of students from GW here. They doing it already. Renee is helping a program, and Samsara is designing social impact projects. Some of them could be startups. They already doing it because they saw they have the expertise and they saw the need. So at GW, we do that through our innovation center.
Thank you very much. And we'll turn to Marisa in a few minutes to have that take also on the importance of education in this sphere. But since you mentioned, Ana Maria, the importance of also crowding in new initiatives or existing initiatives and new resources, let me now turn to Maren. It's a great pleasure to have you on this panel. We want to know, at the U.S. State Department, you have championed a number of initiatives, including the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. I was myself there last year, and I understand that this year's theme is actually Women First, Prosperity for All. Could you talk to us a bit about this interest and the strategy of the U.S. in this field?
Great. Thank you very much. The U.S. government holds prosperity as a top policy priority. And we believe fundamentally that prosperity for the masses is a national security interest. It is a global security interest, but it begins at the community level. And as you mentioned this year, the theme is, and we love the nexus here, is Women First, Prosperity for All. This will be the 9th year that we host the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, and we are really proud of this year. Ivanka Trump will be head of delegation. The President and the Prime Minister of India jointly announced this earlier this summer. In addition to the summit itself, the priority that we place on entrepreneurship extends deeply throughout the year. And it's beyond the partnership that we license as in a host country. It is bringing prosperity to all parts of the world. And so one of the things that I look around the room and I see a lot of partners that we are working with already, including the Global Entrepreneurship Network, we seek to help build communities by whatever it is that inspires entrepreneurs. And so the 3 fundamental takeaways, one is inspiring the culture of entrepreneurship throughout the world, and that comes in many forms. 2 is helping to bridge investments to the ecosystems that are necessary to advance entrepreneurship. And 3, as a policy priority, really working government to government, government to business, and business to business, most importantly, people to people, to help to strengthen this entrepreneurship. So that's in a summary what we're looking to do, but I'd love to open it for questions at the end of the panel.
And we will do that, but you have me react immediately, both on the community engagement front and on the people-to-people front. I think it's the perfect transition to Yasmin El-Bagari. Welcome, Yasmin. It's great to have you here. Can you tell us, because I think that's part of the answer will be in what also Maren said, what was at the origin of you creating Voyage and how you may want to take it forward in terms of community engagement?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. It all started back in 2010. Actually, I received a scholarship from the State Department to move from Morocco to Kansas. And the goal was to break down stereotypes about the Middle East and people in Africa. And I realized the importance of human-to-human interactions. And it kind of became my mission to travel on a Greyhound bus across 50 US states. I have one left, Alaska, if anybody's from here. And I stayed with local families and the community in every single stop. And I realized that what unites us is more stronger than what separates us. And there's a lot of division in the world right now. And I think that if we take time to listen to each other, we can not only empower one another, but really be part of this global movement to create peace, prosperity, and happiness. And so while I was in college, I was thinking about this concept of identity, women's empowerment. I've done research on women's issues in the Arab world, and so I got to travel back and forth for 7 years now, totaling 45 countries, and it was over and over again the same conclusion. It is about human connections. And so how do I create, using my experience around the world, a company that allows to deepen relationships between people who would never meet each other? And my Voyage, which is now my startup, San Francisco based, allows cross-cultural exchange. So if I'm going to Uganda or Paris and I'm interested in music, art, and women's issues, I can be matched with a local host that can give me an authentic experience while also talking about issues that matter. And so this takes me to building community being an important aspect. And we see different tribes, different communities around the world, but how do we break that down? So it becomes a global network of anybody meeting anybody. And so we work with universities, governments. I work with airlines as well, connecting people in any different environment, environment, from airports to university campuses to conferences. Recently, we collaborated with the World Bank, working on WeMena. And so right now, we're in the process of engaging 200 women across the Middle East and North Africa so that they can connect with one another beyond just, I need money, but also sharing their own experiences. So that's what I do.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. And I'll have a follow-up question, which is how do you relate these communities also to the gender dimension of it? And you coming from Morocco as a young female entrepreneur, will be very interested in knowing that. But if I may, Louise, to switch to the other side of the table first, and maybe have you react with Elaine a bit later. Let me turn to Marisa. Marisa, education was put on the table by Anna Maria and a number of others. Mentoring during the first session was an element that both Sundus and Hafez and Karen actually mentioned as a very important way forward to push the issue of women entrepreneurship and more generally of women empowerment. Could you tell us a bit about the work that you are leading at Village Capital and maybe the company's methodology and what you've been confronted with on this specific theme?
Sure, thank you for having me. So Village Capital was founded on the belief that venture capital as a whole is broken. We've done 51 programs around the world. So we have offices in the United States, India, Africa, and Latin America. And we look for entrepreneurs to train and invest in who don't traditionally receive venture capital funding. So we look specifically for women founders, minority founders, and those outside of Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York in the US. Our programs are really focused on training entrepreneurs to become investor ready through a curriculum we've developed over 7 years to really help train them on what they need to know to sort of be at a level playing field as others who come from backgrounds where they would have access to a network of mentors and investors and others who could really help grow their company in a more organic way. And we have a very strong network of alumni as well as a result of doing so many programs. And I think one of the hallmarks of our program is really the connection that the entrepreneurs make with one another. We bring in mentors from all over the country to help them with various aspects of their business, everything from product development to getting to thinking through their business models and thinking through what they need to raise capital, both traditional sources of capital funding as well as non-traditional funding sources like revenue share models and some of the other newer sources of capital that really help support businesses that might not necessarily need or want venture capital funding to scale. And we've really found that that peer community has really helped the entrepreneurs grow. In terms of our investment model, we actually have a unique investment model. We do peer selection. So at the end of each of our programs, each of which has a theme, we work across 5 sectors, one of which is education, but we also do health, agriculture, fintech, and energy. And the companies rank each other on a variety of factors that we've developed, a methodology called WeRISE method that we think what makes a good company, and then the 2 companies emerge from each at the end of each program and receive investment from us. So we have an affiliated venture capital fund to really support those companies in the model. And another thing that we do that's maybe a little bit more unique is we run our programs all over the country. So we're headquartered in DC, but each of our workshops is based somewhere where we think that particular program, companies in that program can benefit from that community. So in our most recent workshop, which was all workforce development focused, we had 12 companies from across the US come through that program, which just ended actually on Friday. We did programs in DC, Phoenix, and Denver, so really bringing in local communities that might be overlooked by entrepreneurs as well as others, and bringing together those communities with the entrepreneurs to help them build partnerships at a local level. And one of the companies in our cohort is actually focused on women's empowerment through career advancement. It's called Land It. They're based in New York City, and they've done an incredible job of really building out a product to help advance women's careers through an online mentoring platform, as well as other articles and resources that women can access to sort of build a personal board of advisors and other things that they might not traditionally think of to do. And they are now in the process of raising another round and getting connected to others. They're also founded by a woman with a strong business background. So we've done a lot in terms of women, bringing together women entrepreneurs as a whole. 50% of this cohort was women, and in terms of our whole portfolio, 43% of our companies are founded by women or have at least one co-founder that's a woman. So that's very important to us, and we think that we can do even more as we grow.
Thank you very much. And if you can connect us to Lande or your network of entrepreneurs, that would be wonderful, including to find mentors. Let me turn to Bouquet to ask you, Bouquet, how do we actually create a global entrepreneurship network, and how useful is it, especially in this field of women entrepreneurs?
That's a great question, and it's also a very difficult question. I've been listening to all of the panelists and the contributions, and I was going to give a lot of examples of programs that we have for women within our network, but I want to give a little bit of my perspective, looking at it through the ecosystem's perspective. And I think for women entrepreneurship, for empowering women entrepreneurs, the 2 aspects that I would like to highlight here are, first of all, this was mentioned a number of times, the right support ecosystem, building the right support ecosystem. And the second part is the recognition. And if we talk about the support ecosystem, I looked at our network. So we work in 170 countries. In each country, we have a dedicated person, or we have a dedicated organization that runs our programs. It's sometimes more than one person, more than one organization. And I actually, since the topic here was MENA, I looked at our MENA network and the influence of women within that network. And I counted, so I was going to give some examples, like I said, but then I started counting, and I saw that we have about, in 12 countries, we have women influencers who are running our programs there. And I think the influence of women within the entrepreneurship ecosystem is something that we should really be looking at from a closer perspective, because we look at, for example, our programs, our initiatives, and how much how inclusive they are in terms of women's participation. And in the MENA region, the participation, especially, for example, for Global Entrepreneurship Week, one of our key programs, has been especially high. I think this is due to the reason that we have women supporting us in countries like Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Morocco, for example. We work with Zinab, Startup Morocco, Egypt, Israel, Malta. I looked at many of these examples, and it's astonishing if you can have the right people in the support ecosystem, how much recognition you can get for women as part of your local programs. For Global Entrepreneurship Week, for example, we actually really do listen to our network, and we come up with programs that they want to focus on as part of this week. And women women entrepreneurship has been one of the days during Global Entrepreneurship Week that we continue to do, because our network has been really inclusive in this sense. And I think this is why we've become a partner of the State Department as part of the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. For the past few years, we've been having a day on women, and this year we're really happy that the summit actually focuses on women entrepreneurship. So support and recognition, from my perspective, are two of the key aspects. But I must also say, research and policy advocacy should also be really part of this. We actually have a representative from our Global Entrepreneurship Research Network, Phil Arswell, here, and I would like to give him, maybe he would like to say a few words about this initiative as well.
Well, I don't want to, I'm grateful for your invitation. I know that we're over time, so I could take maybe 2 minutes, or we could just pass. Okay. Well, thank you, Bouquet. And again, I run the research network within the Global Entrepreneurship Network. I have a thought about outcomes, and then I have a thought about programs and evaluation. About outcomes, if you care about economic growth and jobs, then we all know you should care not just about entrepreneurship, but about high growth entrepreneurship. So if you want to support high growth entrepreneurship, one good thing to do is to figure out what the characteristics of prior successful high growth entrepreneurs might be, and then to find people like them and to support them, I mean, if that's really your objective. And if you do that, then you find that you should be identifying, in as large numbers as possible, people who are between 35 and 50, who've worked for a multinational company, and who have lived overseas and are men. And those are the people that are creating high growth companies in the Middle East. But the thing of it is that really misses the point. And growth is really about unrealized possibilities. I mean, it's the essence of growth, right? If all possibilities have been realized, then we don't need growth. And so in order to think about this topic, in order to think about why we care about women's entrepreneurship, retrospective study is only going to get us so far. And I also think in terms of an outcome metric, I have to say, the longer I work on entrepreneurship and growth, the less I care about either. I think that creating firms is a vector for the way that people improve their circumstances and their lives. But the ultimate purpose is for everybody on the planet to realize their full potential in society, to realize their own aspirations. That's the whole point. And so when someone has a chance, when somebody has a vision and creates that vision and is able to connect with other people, whether it's through art or music or building building a company, then that's in and of itself a valuable thing. So I think supporting women's entrepreneurship is in and of itself valuable because there are people who want to create something, and they are people, and they should be supported in doing that, and any obstacle that's in their way should be eliminated. So I'm really less about sort of second and third order effects and more about the inherent process. On the second point, I just simply want to refer everybody, I really do think it's worth writing this down. Don Berwick, JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, 2008, BERWICK, The Science of Improvement. Don Berwick is one of the leading people in public health. He wrote a paper on the limitations of randomized controlled trials. What he wrote about in JAMA in 2008 for the public health community is eminently valuable to people in entrepreneurship who are trying to do better program evaluation. And I'll just simply say that intervening in entrepreneurship is a very complex thing, as we just talked about, as Karen was pointing out. These are multidimensional interventions. Controlling upon all the relevant dimensions is very difficult. We have the standard problems of experiments, of non-stationary distributions, and of external validity. It is a tool, but I would just say, because I see it happening everywhere, please do not elevate RCTs as any kind of gold standard. It is a method, the sort of methods we saw today of large data. This is another method. And the third method is just simply one's own ethics and values, which is also a method. And so all of these things are important to entrepreneurship research. So anyway, that's basically what I have to say.
Thank you, Phil and Bouke. And I think, you know, it's not just yet the conclusion, but it could be definitely a segue into what my esteemed colleague Elaine is going to present us. Don't worry for those who are already are getting ready to leave the room. It will be a short presentation. It's more about presenting the framework. As you said, Phil, you know, there are lots of different pieces, and development is also about bringing these different pieces together and seeing if there's a path forward. Elaine, over to you.
So I think, I mean, we come back to what is the role that the World Bank can play in supporting women's entrepreneurship. And one of the tasks that we have is we're going to be helping the Saudi government develop their own interventions for supporting women's entrepreneurship. And you can see we've already been successful with managing to get women to drive, so we'll take full credit for that, even though it has nothing to do with us. But I think it's actually, and one thing I will point out though is, like, even Saudi, which probably has the least, made the least progress in terms of supporting women entrepreneurs, when they actually have started opening up, they have made tremendous progress. So there's a lot of latent demand there. And as an example, I give you, like, the total entrepreneurship activity in Saudi Arabia for men is 12.9%. And for women, it has gone up from 1% in 2009 to 9.7%. So the women are really closing the gap with the men very quickly. And I think it's once you have that open and willingness of the government to be able to allow it to happen, things can move very fast. And especially in the MENA region, we can see this also happening too. So what is it that we can do for in terms of interventions? I mean, we've talked about various different interventions coming from finance or business development services or market access, enabling environments, looking at the regulatory and the rules things. And you can put these all together, you can have separate ones, but it also helps, I think, that you have to have the government backing behind it. Because sometimes when we're working individually, or we're working like one NGO is doing it and another donor agency is doing it, and we're not really kind of coordinating and not bringing a comprehensive program together, then we just start overlapping. We see it in Palestine, where there's so many incubators there. They're totally overlapping each other, and they're not producing high quality entrepreneurs because they're all competing for the same ones. So you need a different type of service element. You need a different entry point into it. So I think this is where we need to take a more, like everyone brings it up, the whole ecosystem, holistic view of it, to see where is it that they're performing well, where is it that they're not performing well, and work together to try and build a more comprehensive program for it all. And I'm not going to go through some of the good interventions, like on finance interventions. We have the Ethiopia one, where you're able to use, they're dispersing $2 million a month in financing to women entrepreneurs because they developed a line of credit just for women. And I think we're starting, this theme comes up a lot, where you have peer-to-peer learning among women, you have mentorship with women, and in a way you don't want to reinforce that segregation, but I think for initial stages it actually is very important. I know I went to a women's college, and we produced Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright, so you know there is something to be said about like segregating the sexes sometimes. So And then, and the fact that they can learn from each other, I think, creates that kind of enabling environment for them to succeed later on and to be more, it really is a confidence issue. And I think Karen also mentioned this too, that, you know, one of the soft skills, the personal initiatives, has been the most effective way of getting women entrepreneurs out there and being able to get them to realize that they can do it just as well. And then it's also breaking down the barriers that and the biases that might happen in the access to finance activities. There's also market access interventions that you can do, like WeConnect International. That's more of a private sector approach, but then you also have the public sector. And I think from the World Bank perspective, we have to start looking at what are the government interventions that can help women entrepreneurs. Can you do federal procurement of women-owned businesses? The US government does this. To be honest, I didn't realize it wasn't as, it's been successful in the sense that for the first time in their history in 2015, they actually hit their targets. But their target was only 5% of procurement. And that was a little bit astonishing. We would have thought that you would get more women-owned businesses, but maybe there is a lot more that needs to be done to try and encourage women to be involved in government procurement, or maybe they're just not in those sectors. So what is it that can be done? So I think it does take a little bit of research and digging to find out what are the good examples that help to support women entrepreneurs, especially on the regulations and the legal side. There's a lot of discriminatory laws that we need to actually work towards. And this is something that the World Bank has the platform to be able to do and work with governments to enable these kind of changes. And we can build the case for like why it is important for them to do it. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you very much. It wraps it up nicely. I think that from the World Bank's perspective, to piggyback on what you just said, objective number one is really to bring people together and be used as a convener. I think that this was very much the case. Researchers, analysts, practitioners from different organizations, the wealth of information that we had here and in the first panel is tremendous. And I'm grateful to all of you who have spoken to these issues, to these very important issues. Of course, we didn't do justice to many of you, and it will require follow-up engagements and probably meeting. So we're very much looking forward to that. We'll wrap it up and turn it to Luis, Sundus, or Yara if they have any parting thoughts. Let me turn to Luis. I understand that it's a bit of an awkward position you are in, Luis, but you went through the two panels just as Sundus and Yara did, and I was wondering if you had any parting statements, and I'll turn to Sundus and Yara afterwards.
Listen, well, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's funny because we are just next door at the Inter-American Development Bank, and you see these things happening in here. And we have to work much closer. And when Elaine was referring to S-Factor in Chile, the Startup Chile, what I've seen in Startup Chile is something that we have to do more. We have Colombian companies, women entrepreneurs from Colombia being accelerated in a Startup Chile. And so when we have to begin to think about how to use better our platforms and our resource, because it doesn't make any sense for doing Chilean for Chilean, Colombia for Colombians, and Brazilians for Brazilians. And I think that when we think from a regional point of view, replicating programs that are successful, it doesn't make much sense. I mean, we can take the entrepreneurs there. And I think it's very powerful in that sense. So, I mean, first of all, congratulations. Thank you for this incredible afternoon. Very enriching. I mean, a topic that all of us are very passionate about, a topic that it will only continue to grow, particularly, as I said, in a context of digital economy, of platforms of learning and deep transformation technology. I do see women coming out of that as a winner. And I think that the education is a key element to take full advantage of it. But I do feel that we have to work much closer. So I appreciated the invitation to come over and to participate in this great afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you for staying throughout. Thanks also to Sundus and Yara. Over to you.
It's like one comment about what you said about Chilean and Colombian companies. Actually, I was looking into the different accelerators in Morocco and incubators, and there is this thing called the Blue Villa. It's in Taghazout. and they're actually bringing a lot of interest from French startups because of the region. Because I mean, it's an amazing environment and climate. So it's a great idea actually to do this at a regional level, and I think we should think about that way. You know, just not a national level, but also like international and regional.
And if I may, you know, this is also one of the objectives of the global rollouts now of WeMena and the start of the conversation around WeRISE. We hope to be able to count on you, Yara, to continue to promote both WeMena and WeRISE, and to continue to give us good ideas and feedback from the entrepreneurs themselves. Do you want to close this session?
That's a responsibility to close it.
You had many today, so here you are.
But at the end of the day, I definitely want to end this conversation with the fact that I still more believe that women in the Middle East, if we're particularly talking about this part of the world, needs a community that supports them, in the sense of giving them, as Melissa said, confidence that they can actually do it, no matter where they're coming from, which class they're coming from, lower, middle, higher. All of them need confidence that they can do. All of them need maybe not role models, because I partially disagree that women need role models so they could look for and act like them, because if we're taking myself as an example, I've never had a role model that it's a man or a woman. It was a matter of having the confidence that I have a message, and there's other women, other men, everyone around here has a message that needs to be delivered. And there are certain calibers and certain things that programs like WeMena, companies like YouNoodle were like channels to help these messages been built. Without knowing that the World Bank CEO is actually a woman. I didn't know that. So this is one thing. And the second thing, talking about education, I think education is very important, and now important in the sense of building and enabling women and men, and especially women, to still believe in themselves and to have the knowledge to start and to know the know-how. And maybe I was very privileged to have good education, but also I think from where we're standing, there could be alternative education that could help women and tackling the lower class women. Back home, there are a lot of women who produce stuff, and they have products and they have services, but they've never been framed as entrepreneurs because they don't know how to speak up, how to come here and talk about their businesses. And maybe at some point, the World Bank and other institutions can actually help these women become someone, or let's say have an effective role in the economy. Because when the revolution hit Egypt in 2011, there was these micro businesses that would made the country keep working, and was actually like, we have been affected, but there were micro businesses, and if you look at them, most of them were more women who work producing food at home that doesn't go under any taxes or anything. So I think at some point these women or this caliber can definitely be a topic, maybe next year or something.
Absolutely, and as far as role models are concerned, you will be our role model, Yara. As the Americans say, what's the expression? A shout out to our friend André, who has pulled together both sessions, and a great team. And thank you so much. Stay tuned, because we might be together again soon enough. Thanks a lot.